greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate, has goose-stepped us into misery and bloodshed. We have developed speed, but we have shut ourselves in. Machinery that gives abundance has left us in want. Our knowledge has made us cynical, our cleverness hard and unkind. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent, and all will be lost. To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish. Don't give yourselves to brutes, men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. You are not machines. You are not cattle. You are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate, only the unloved hate, the unloved and the unnatural. Don't fight for slavery, fight for liberty. In the 17th chapter of St. Luke it is written, the kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure.
Hear ye, old man, for a dose of reality is at hand. Today we have a special guest, Thad McKraken. He's a psychedelic writer, musician, visual artist, filmmaker, occultist, and self-proclaimed pug enthusiast based out of Seattle. You can check out his stuff on disinfo.com. Thad, if you have anything to add to that, you can go right ahead, and otherwise, go ahead and talk about yourself.
No, I mean, that's a pretty good intro. Here talking with you guys today, probably for talking about my new books. I definitely have a couple books out right now. The book out I have right now is called Transmissions from Outside of Time. It's a channeled book of intel that I gathered by means of hash-based sex magic, and it's a reality book about my dreams and how weird this got. But it reads like a work of fiction, as if you would read this and think that this is fiction, that I'm just making this stuff up. But I'm not. And it's kind of about how far the human imagination can be stretched. And then if you read the book, it gets a bit weirder because it's nice to attribute this stuff to being all in my head. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, there's a long history of psi research, which has been largely ignored at this point in human history. Yep. And in my book, on multiple times, when I started documenting this kind of stuff pretty accurately, and then online, I was putting on Facebook, I ended up predicting my future in multiple ways, in ways that are kind of hard to question, because there's really, I mean, some of the things, there's really no way I would have known about this by any sort of materialist means, and yet I'm predicting things that are happening like a year in advance, like a year before they happen, which is, you know, there's some research into the science of precognitive dreaming going on whatnot right now, but the book in a way is just another demonstration to hopefully, I'd like to think mainstream science is sort of, they can kind of dip their toes in these waters right now, and then somebody sort of working on the outsides and the fringe can just like take things like really far. And so this is how weird this shit can get, and hopefully by me doing that, people that are more of a kind of working within institutions will hopefully push, science and the science of precognitive dreaming and things like phenomenon forward by a small step. At least that's sort of my hope in writing the things that I do, is that it'll help inspire, us to get a greater understanding of the potentiality of human consciousness in general and the human imagination, which has been a largely maligned field of exploration and study because of religious paranoia and superstition. And ultimately, though, religion is sort of used as a tool of imperialism, so it's hard to really put the blame on religion entirely when really it's really imperialism. The idea that you can get greater kicks by manipulating the human imagination on the cheap or for free, and you're going to get bigger kicks doing that than buying $1 million mansion or buying a fast car or whatever, or video games or whatever. This is the most dangerous idea to capitalism as it exists, and kind of the expansionary capitalism that's out there, and so it's been so suppressed by our society, and getting any kind of research done into it is met with such hostility and scorn and just unworthy doubt that anything I can do to just say, hey, things like dreams and psychedelic drugs and concepts like shamanism and the occult, there's more to this than we think. We look at this stuff as a joke, and yet it all makes a lot of sense, and a kind of sense that I think is greatly needed at this point in human history. We need the ability to look at things in a more subjective and a metaphorical standpoint, and we need to listen to altered states of consciousness. But anyways, that's a brief spiel. What you got?
So first, if you could sort of, in a nutshell, tell the audience, talk to us how you say that the occult path, quote unquote, chose you, and then can you explain an occultist point of view on the universe creation?
Yeah, well, the story of the occult choosing me is weird because it comes back to astral projection, and I started playing around with astral projection when I was like 18 years old because I had such a strong reaction to psychedelic drugs, and I'll try and sum this up as briefly as I can. So psychedelic drugs, when I take them, I just have such a ridiculously strong reaction with things like LSD and psilocybin. I don't know why. Even marijuana, if I meditate when I'm stoned, I can have very strong visionary experiences where I'm seeing art that isn't there, hearing angelic choirs, hearing music that I can sort of manipulate with my own mind. And when I first took psychedelic drugs, I kind of encountered this trans-dimensional dimension of pure living art, except it wasn't that this dimension of art that I encountered was devoid of intelligence. It seemed to be like almost a higher intelligence than we are. Just a whole realm comprised of kind of rapidly mutating, pure alien artworks, essentially. So it was such a profound and weird experience that I went from being a person that had zero interest in spirituality and in fact had sort of rejected Christianity, I don't know, a couple of years before I first did psychedelic mushrooms. And then instantly I was interested in like all kinds of weird shit. All of a sudden I go from being a guy who, I don't know, had maybe read like Stephen King books, that's really what I'd read at that point in my life. I really wasn't that avid a reader, and I started reading like everything I could find about, remote viewing and shamanism and alien contact stuff and like all this weird shit. And so, my personality changed overnight. And one of the things that I got into, and this weirdly enough, because my mom had experimented with it back in the 60s with a mild degree of success, is astral projection. And there's this author called Robert Monroe who wrote a book on astral projection that was enormously popular in the 70s. And he took it beyond just writing books about it. I mean, this started spontaneously happening to him when he was in his 50s. He just, and that's why, again, how these things, it's how when you're talking about the occult, how the invisible world influences reality. This guy goes from being a successful businessman, radio entrepreneur, all of a sudden he just starts devoting all this money and starts a nonprofit into out-of-body experiences. And when you ask him why he's doing that, he would tell you, because I started having these out-of-body experiences spontaneously. You have to take his word on whether that's real or not, but one thing you can say is that this guy out of nowhere decides all of a sudden,
just flopped.
Yeah, I'm a rich radio entrepreneur. All of a sudden, guess what? I'm going to start investing all this money on researching consciousness and out-of-body experiences. I'm going to start a nonprofit organization, which still exists to this day, by the way. And so they have these techniques that you can use. So it's beyond, he didn't just study altered states of consciousness. He actually created a technology. It's a sound technology. He was a radio entrepreneur, and the design is to separate you from your body and reproduce this kind of.
That's the Monroe Institute.
Monroe Institute.
Correct.
Yeah. So again, and I must point out, I was incredibly skeptical of this stuff. You read this shit, and even though I had my mind blown by psychedelics, this still sounds absolutely batshit crazy. You're like, wait, people can you can separate your soul from your body and traverse the unknown dimensions, whatever, just like Doctor Strange shit, essentially. And, and that's literally Doctor Strange's superpower. And so you're like, well, that sounds like a bunch of shit. But weirdly enough, the first night that I was reading it, what they're talking about is you're intentionally inducing a sleep paralysis state of consciousness. And then when you induce the sleep paralysis state of consciousness, then the idea is that you roll out of your body. Now,
yes, I've done these. When I first got into lucid dreaming, they went through these different techniques like the mild and the wild, like the awake-induced lucid dreams, where you would just essentially lay there for an extended period of time and just allow your body to go into sleep paralysis. But I never got to the point where I could do like the rollover technique, because I just couldn't make the connection between thinking I was rolling over and actually doing it and having the patience to actually do it.
I'm with you. I couldn't really do it myself. Yeah, and there's the classic out-of-body experience where you induce sleep paralysis, you roll out, and then you're like hovering above your body and staring down at yourself. Monroe describes this. I can never do it with either. What happened to me was even a bit weirder, though, is that I doubted this stuff, and you're reading a book about it, and then the first night that I'm reading this book, I found myself in the sleep paralysis state, as if it's an experience that has made me think about the power of hypnotic suggestion from that day on.
It's sketchy for people who just like find themselves in it. You know what I mean? Your body's paralyzed and you might loose and or just when I did it.
More people than they even know.
The first time that I caught myself in it, I could hear like a little girl laughing in my room, and I just had to sort of be, maintain some peace of mind.
No, and it can be absolutely terrifying. And I wouldn't say, and you're absolutely right too. It happens to way more people than ever talk about it or admit it. And it really didn't happen to me until I intentionally started trying to do it, but it happens to a lot of people spontaneously. And weirdly enough, so you're reading this book about how astral projection, I'm sitting there thinking in my mind that it's bullshit, and yet the first time I'm reading this book, I'm get like a third of the way through it, and I get into the sleep paralysis state that night, as if, the hypnotic suggestion, like, you can do this thing, and then that night my body's like, oh yeah, by the way, you can do this thing they're talking about, and so, but it didn't happen again until I started actually using his tapes. But it's terrifying, and weirdly enough, sleep paralysis has been getting a lot of mainstream coverage. Like, scientists are actually finally studying this phenomenon, but they're looking at it from a perspective of, this is a terrifying, materialist, horrible thing that we want to go away. And I'm seeing all these articles. I've seen several articles on places like Vice and some more just mainstream like media sites talking about sleep paralysis, and none of them mention Monroe at all. None of them mention astral projection. And I agree, this can be terrifying things, but the idea is that you can do more with this state, that you can turn it into something else, and that's how I got summoned into the occult. Like, this is how I got into the occult. I am not somebody who's interested in the occult at all. In fact, I sort of find it stupid. I definitely thought... I did, Grant Morrison piqued an interest. There was a great hippie kind of free publication in the 2000s called Arthur Magazine, and I read an interview with him. I didn't even know who Grant Morrison was at the time, and he was talking about magic, and it sounded interesting. He was saying the same thing that I said about astral projection, which is like, I tried this stuff, and I thought that it was bullshit, and then I tried it and sort of realized it wasn't bullshit. And he was saying the same thing about magic, so it intrigued me, but I thought the whole scene was sort of like, the whole vibe of it was so sketchy. And not only that, there's a sexual element to it as well, which I think is just hard to get over for most Westerners because we're so sexually repressed.
Exactly.
The idea of thinking about anything other than sex, because really, it's very like sex magic stuff is it's a very simple concept. It's just a concept that is so weird to Westerners. It's such an odd idea. So I maybe rolled out of my body once or twice, and both times I got so scared that I zapped back in. It's like the fear. Back into your body. And it's weirdly enough, my brother experimented with that too, and that's about as far as he got. He had a couple experiences like that where he basically rolled out of his body, and then it's like, oh, that's so freaky. Now, instantly I'm right back in my body. It's just like, it's this feeling of like, wow, that shouldn't be happening, but it is.
So to stay on the astral projection points before we move forward, and to keep going into your story here. Mike Sav, my buddy Mike actually wanted me to ask a couple of questions. One relates to that. So he wants me to ask, in terms of an out-of-body experience, and that, is it a psychological experience strictly, or are we actually interacting with external forces, or is it along the lines of Lon Milo Duquette's worldview, where it's basically all in your head, but that's the reality that we exist in, or does it not even matter, and it's just about doing it?
So, yeah, let me elaborate first. So what happened with astral projection is I never had really the experience where I rolled out of my body, although I was pulled out of my body at one point into kind of like higher realms. Another story. But anyways, what started happening to me when I experimented with this stuff is I started having what I call astral contact encounters, and this goes right along with the question. And so what this is the best way I can describe this is I'm in a lucid dreaming state. Well, and that's the other thing. Once I started experimenting with Monroe's techniques, I started lucid dreaming like that. Like overnight.
Those are so much fun.
Yeah, I went from having no lucid dreams to having lucid dreams. And lucid dreaming in general is something that materialism, I mean, it really calls materialism. If you've really had lucid dreams,
it'll shatter your atheistic perspective.
I've had 2 lucid dreams. If I never had them, I wouldn't believe any of this.
Yeah, no, I mean, because it does. Because the idea we're getting is that all your senses are coming from the exterior world, and your conscious experience is coming from sensory input. The second you start having lucid dreams, you're all of a sudden in a world that is just as real to you as the world that you exist in, except none of that's coming from your senses. So it's material into question. And I like to stress this when I talk about this as much as I actually, if you watch, say the movie Inception, which is the one, lucid dreaming kind of invading popular culture, there's the thing called the totem, which I'd never heard of before, where you have something to prove to yourself that they were dreaming.
I like that idea a lot.
Yeah. Well, what's fascinating about it is that I didn't realize I'd done that for years. And the reason is because that's what people don't get is you have to experience this kind of thing. You can just tell someone about this, like a materialist, and they're just like, well, that doesn't prove anything. What are you talking about? And I'm like, no. You're in a world, and you don't get it. It's so real. You literally have to have a totem because you cannot convince yourself that you're dreaming. You're like, this is so real. And so my totem for years was weird enough. I would go up to a wall and I would put my fist against the wall, and then it would give resistance, and then all of a sudden my hand would go through the wall, and I'd turn it around, and that was my totem to be like, oh shit, okay, I am dreaming.
I like that
because it's so convincing to you in this experience that it's real that you literally can't believe it. So anyway, so I started lucid dreaming instantly, and then I started having these astral contact encounters, and that's a different form of lucid dreaming. This is I'm dreaming, I know I'm dreaming, and yet I'm in a dream world that is controlled and seemingly made by something other than me. And it's telling me a story in this dream world and sort of educating me as to aspects of the higher realms. And then a lot of times I'd be in this kind of one dream state, and then all of a sudden it's like you're interacting with this other kind of entity that's controlling the reality that you're existing in, educating you. Then in the midst of this, I would slip back, and all of a sudden you're in a sleep paralysis state. And in the sleep paralysis state, there is an entity right next to you, latched on to your psychic spirit. And then you pull out of reality after that happens. So you're going through phases. You're in this one dream world where this thing is controlling your dreams, and then it flips back to the sleep paralysis state. In the sleep paralysis state, there is an entity conjoined with you, which is essentially attached to your spirit and is controlling your dreaming. And then you go back, and again, sounds completely batshit from a materialist perspective, from what we're raised. There's people have been writing about this for thousands of years. Just one of another one. So, again, from an objective standpoint, that lends some credence to it. So that was all to set up the fact that, if you're asking whether it's real or not, I never got into the kind of the occult perspective. What I've been forced to confront, and what you can see in my book, is that whatever you're communicating with in this state is in touch with the world that I exist in the waking world, in a way that I don't understand. It knows things about this reality that I don't. There is a connection between inner states of consciousness and outer states of consciousness, and your inner mind knows things about supposedly outer reality that you don't know, particularly in my mind, in a kind of a precognitive way. More than anything, it's I have a harder time saying that when I really think about it, there's definitely more precog there's more of a precognitive element to this than there is a psychic element to this, as I would say. But yes, these worlds are interrelated. We are enmeshed in a larger narrative, and yes, so it is tied to the physical reality. I'm not one of those people that can say no, it's just in my head. No, it absolutely there is a reality to it, but really, the world of consciousness is so much stranger and weirder and larger than we can understand. And also the nature of time is very strange. So yes, there is an ability, and what I've seen multiple times is these entities. My book is called Transmissions from Out of Time, and that's what these sort of entities have showed me repeatedly. It's like, from our perspective, your reality, the entirety of human history looks like one thing. So time means a completely different thing to them than it does to us. So, they can, and the best metaphor you can give is it's like a story to them that they can go back that's not done. It's like a story that they're working on that's not finished yet. So it's like, say, people making a movie and, they're not done with it. But while in the course of you're making a movie and you're not done with it, you can still go back to the front and be like, oh shit, we don't like that ending. We're going to go re-edit that and reshoot that. That part, the scene in the beginning doesn't make any sense. Like, you can keep, the structure of it. To them, it's one fucking thing, right? But that's not the way it seems to us whatsoever. So yeah, whatever I've contacted through means of actual projection and sex magic, it has a reality and it understands things about our world that we don't get at all.
So for astral projection, multi-level question, how often do you still do it? And do you think for people who are trying to do it that it's a matter of just try, sort of like a metaphysical, like just by the intention that big snowball is going to essentially just roll itself and you'll be able to do it? Or is it sort of like a... Because me personally, the thing that I have trouble doing is, like, I get so sucked into it that I sort of obsess about it and I forget about all the other duties that I have to do. Then, like, it just becomes, because I definitely want to experience it, but yeah.
As far as how, I can recommend playing around with Moon Rose techniques. With me, I don't do this stuff anymore.
Oh.
Well, that's not entirely true. I do it through different means, but as far as the trying to induce sleep paralysis, I haven't done that in years, and I stopped doing it because, to be quite honest, I had some experiences that scared the shit out of me, which, and yet,
would you be willing to share one of those?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll definitely talk about some of those. I'd also go on to my way to point out that I've had some experiences that I do not regret experimenting with this stuff, and this is kind of the nature of it. Like, I encourage people to do that, and yet would fully admit that I stopped doing it because I had some rather terrifying experiences. Yet, simultaneously, I do not regret doing it at all. In fact, I think doing that was maybe one of the smartest things I've ever done, and I never got into how I got summoned into the occult, which is why, and that is because eventually something that I made contact with through doing this astral projection showed up and
was like, hey, yeah.
Yeah, it snapped something with me and turned me into an occultist. I don't even know if I had a choice. It
At that point, do you think while you were practicing it, did you have any sort of metaphysical background in the sense of setting an intention to only attract something for your best good, or something that's setting up a space that's going to protect you?
Yeah, to a little bit, but not really. Yeah, no, okay. I started, when I was kind of summoned into the occult, which is weirdly enough 10 years ago now. Yeah, it was 2006. So I've been now doing kind of magic, and yes, now I think about that kind of stuff all the time.
Yeah.
But before that, I started experimenting. I was gradually and sort of unconsciously moving into the ritualistic use of hallucinogens, and I'm a musician, and so I had started making music that I realized on an unconscious level the point to which was to summon spirits in hallucinatory states, summon kind of transdimensional entities. I was making music that was designed to do that to me, and so I started working on that when I was like 18. So I was sort of working towards a ritualistic, which is a more shamanic than traditional esoteric, like cult thing. So I definitely started dabbling in that at a very young age as well, in addition to astral projection. And I did do some kind of like hallucinogen experiments with my music. I only did a couple, but like the point was, I was curious I was making this music to how much, there's the classic psychedelic credo of set and setting are dictating the potency and efficacy of the psychedelic experience. So I started, I did a couple times, like I was just curious because I'd been experimenting with this stuff, and I was like, okay, I'm going to take a low dose of hallucinogens and then see if, so I'm not getting much like visuals or hallucinations, and then try and play music to see if it's more the music or it's the hallucinogens that were causing it, and this kind of experimentation. And what I found was it was both, because I took a low dose where I wasn't feeling much, and then I put on some of this music that I designed, and I started like tripping balls and having visuals, and this portal opened up on the floor, and then the second the music was over, it just kind of receded and went away again. So this is all before I got into Magick. So I was like kind of experimenting with things like that, but yeah, no, I mean.
So Nate had to stick on the psychedelic or the drugs at the moment, and then we'll move into some other things. Nate has some questions from one of your articles.
All right, so this is going to be a two-part question on your article about high and low dimensional drugs. Number one, can you explain high versus low dimensional drugs? And also, you say any magician worth his own weight in salt uses some chemicals in his practice. Can you explain what chemicals you use and why you use them?
For what reason?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great question. And yeah, I first of all, we got this. There's like the archetype of the sorcerer magician in our culture, and that he's always like holding this beaker. That's always been part of it. The idea of the magic potion and whatnot, and exactly. And this goes back to shamanism, and there's a reason for that. We because of drug hysteria have taken out the context, but the idea, is that the medicine man, that this guy is dealing with sacred substances and whatnot. And in my practice, and increasingly is why I write about magic, but I've had to realize that what I do is so much different than the vast majority of other magicians that I've read to, that it might as well be a completely different thing. And I've started even writing kind of like instructional things, mainly because and you can search advanced sigil projection if you want to look into that, and I'll get into the higher dimensional. But the reason is my practice has largely become about developing a relationship with these chemicals and tweaking the set and setting to maximize potency, which is where I was coming from before I ever got into the kind of Western esoteric tradition. I was more influenced by shamanism and the idea that you can, what I was just talking about, that you can influence consciousness through sound while in a psychedelic headspace. I mean, this goes back thousands of years, and you got shamans singing Akiros to go wrong with ayahuasca. I have a pretty close relationship with psilocybin and marijuana at this point, and I'm one of the few magicians who talks about, as much as I love to talk about psychedelic drugs, I don't really actually do psychedelic drugs very often anymore, because it's such a powerful kind of energy draining experience that I want to be at a point where there's a real good reason that I'm doing them. Say I finished a film or I'm kind of pleased. So and I use psychedelic drugs, so like acid and mushrooms, a lot more when I was younger, and I hit to a point where I got the vibe that the spirits were sort of angry with me and wanted to be more responsible with it. But I use marijuana daily, and I'm an advocate. I really think weed can be used as a meditational aid, and there's a tradition in the Western era. It's kind of the blending between shamanism and the Western era esoteric tradition, and the idea that weed can aid astral projection has been going on for hundreds of years now in the Western era esoteric tradition. So I'm a huge advocate of that. It's weird. I live in Seattle and weed is legal here, and I still don't see really anybody other than me writing about marijuana's potential as a meditational aid. But I've been using it that way ever since I started using marijuana, and increasingly, like the book that I have out is about kind of these kind of transmissions. And to answer your question about the higher dimensional versus lower dimensional drugs, I don't sugarcoat it. When I talk about, talking to, these extra dimensional forms of intelligence, I have, contacted what I would call demonic forms of intelligence, and this is, again, in a occult tradition that everybody has a demonic and an angelic kind of guardian spirit associated with me, and I've had a lot of communications with this demonic form of intelligence, and what it showed me is that largely that it's you know, there's all these conspiracy theories and whatnot, and nobody's really talking about the drug war in that context, and in that context, you got to face the fact that there's a narcotics epidemic that's, you know, going out of control.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, and alcohol as well, and I have experience.
It's all on purpose, of course.
Oh yeah, no. Well, it's on purpose, but not really in a way that humans can understand. I don't think people understand why this is happening. You know, but it's happening for a reason, and it's a pretty fucked up reason from our perspective. I think there's a bigger perspective that we don't really see, but it's pretty fucked up. And yeah, I mean, I think, hey, I'm the first one to admit, man, I used to drink, and weirdly enough, we talk about drugs, and so what I was getting at with higher dimensional versus lower dimensional drugs is we don't really talk about how these drugs affect us, because you got like drugs like weed and psilocybin that kind of take you out of, you know, this reality. They take you kind of more into your head and more into the subjective realms. Then you got things like booze and meth and cocaine and narcotics to a certain extent, and these kind of like take you into this reality. They put you in, and you know, I'm not like. And I'm not, and gee, wonder why these drugs are so popular in a super materialist society. You know, if demonic forms of intelligence were trying to bind you to the lower dimension, it would make perfect sense that they'd be using these drugs and getting people hooked on these drugs as a means of doing so, right? And hey, man, like I said, I used to drink like constantly. I used to be such a good functional drunk, and weirdly enough, 10 years ago when I started getting Magick, I was for some reason like possessed with this idea that I could master alcohol or control alcohol, and you know, and the thing is, I can. And when I'm talking about, you know, potions, it's like alcohol can be used. I have done good things with alcohol. I don't want to just be this like person like, oh, drinking is like awful and so is cocaine, because it's more complicated than that. You can use alcohol, brings people together. I think it lowers social inhibitions. God knows, I used to be in a band where, you know, I was in charge of most of the booking of my shows and whatnot, and going out and drinking and talking to people. Music, live music at a low, you know, when it's, you know, at a more local level, revolves around selling out booze anyway. So it's so easy for people to get caught up in the lifestyle. I got caught up in it just like any like so many other people, and you know, and I thought I could control this, and you know, and I was like, oh, I can control booze, which I could to an extent. You know, I was really amazed. I was an incredibly functional drunk, and alcohol made me incredibly productive. Weirdly enough, you know, I would. You know, write songs and write, you know, God, my first book was written largely while I was, you know, at least consuming some drinks. Like, you can, in fact, use alcohol to your advantage, but it's a difficult drug because it's so hard on the body, and that's what I ran into eventually. Like, I had, you know, it's been shown to this in, like, very specific terms. Like, I had this reserve of energy that I could use to, like, control this alcoholic part side of myself, and then it, like, completely exploded, and now I can barely drink at all, and the whole thing just kind of blew up in my face. It's nice to glamorize those things, but you can only keep that pace up for so long. It's going to backfire on you at some point, and and that's why all I can.
So when you said that you use marijuana for meditation, where is the sort of line there? Because I know, at least from my experience, have you found that when you try to sit and still yourself or contemplate or connect to, you know, your source, that you have trouble doing it when you don't smoke? Because, or sort of, have you just made that your incarnational thing, is to just smoke when you meditate, and that's how it's going to be?
Well, I do sober meditation as well. I've been doing, weirdly enough, why am I spacing on the transcendental meditation, which, you know, people like David
mantra.
Yeah, exactly. David Lynch is like a huge proponent of it, you know, like Andy Kaufman back in the day. Lynch, you know, and you know, I took classes on how to do that in college, and you know, I still do it to this day. And weirdly enough, I do definitely think though that there is something with marijuana, especially. Oh, sure. This is when you're getting into kind of sex magic as well, and you know, this is kind of the Western esoteric, like an occult tradition, is that marijuana definitely accentuates the sexual experience. And it accentuates the orgasmic state, and so in the combination of those things, I think creates a pretty unique state of consciousness that can be capitalized on, and that's largely what my book is about, is using that state. But also, it happens all the time, just in dreams and whatnot. And and you know, it's interesting because I've experimented with in astral projection, which I was talking about earlier. There's no drugs involved with that. That's, you know, arguably the weirdest thing that I've ever done. No drugs involved with that. You're just sitting there listening and meditating and listening to tape sober. That all being said, I definitely a lot of people have this negative attitude. A lot of it comes from kind of Buddhism and a lot of other traditions where it's just like, no, drugs are bad. You can do anything without drugs that you can do with drugs. And weirdly enough, though, then you have shamanism, which is like, no, we use drugs. I think both are true. And yeah, I think it's sort of snobby to think, too. I think you can do things not using drugs that you probably couldn't do using drugs. And I think definitely that you can think my meditational states that I get into sometimes just, using weed are different. There's a level of intensity and an alien nature to them that doesn't happen necessarily with my more sober meditations. And I can definitely say through dreams and more sober meditations, a lot of times I get far more coherent information. Yeah. It's like that's actually way easier to read and makes a lot more sense than what I would necessarily think. But with weed, though, I mean, I do more weed meditation than sober meditation, partially because of existing in Western society. And it's interesting. And yeah, I know. I mean, like, I don't deny the fact that I smoke probably more pot than I should, and I rely on weed too much. But, I'm at the point in my life where my writing doesn't actually pay enough for me to support myself. So there's this, I end up smoking pot to deal with, living in Western society and the nonstop stream of fucking tedious bullshit that you have to deal with.
Just constant tedious bullshit.
I do not deny that part of my high weed consumption is due to the fact that Western society is a bunch of shit, and
the Western society stresses.
Yeah, exactly. Talk about, I have like I'm one of those guys that it's like I have like alpha male, like, warrior type DNA in me that turns me into a bit of a dick at sometimes. And, like weed is so good at helping me not be an asshole, and like, it's very good to the point that I'm actually a really nice, like over the top guy, but it really helps me keep that, I think a lot of men have that kind of like warrior, like, fucking don't fuck with me, thousands of years of like hunting DNA that's built up in them. And weed so helps me just step back and be like, nah, whatever. It's no big deal,
All right, yeah, so I wanted to ask you a question about microdosing on psilocybin. Have you tried it? What were the effects of it? And what were the amounts you were taking as a microdose?
And like the sort of the value of the experience.
So weirdly enough, it's like synchronicity always comes into play. So these friends of mine were booked a psychedelic music festival in Seattle called the Hypnoticon. And so I went to do a post on Disinfo about that, and I was thinking, because I had mushrooms in my fridge, like I said, I don't do mushrooms very often anymore. I do them ritualistically, and I had just kind of done them like a year ago. And so I was thinking, like, okay, I'm going to do these mushrooms, but I was like, so this music fest is coming up, so I'm like, I was thinking about microdosing before it, and then I posted it, and then literally the next post on Disinfo was about microdosing. So I was like, okay, synchronous, that answers that question. I'm gonna finally try this microdose. I did, and I went to the festival, and the first time I did it, I got a little more than I wanted. So long story short, I've tried it like 10, 15 times, then I kind of stopped, and then I just kept getting questions about it. It's weird. I post things, and sometimes I don't really. It depends on how busy I am. I don't necessarily check back to see how popular they were. So like 6 months after I posted this article, I kept getting people asking me questions about it. And I was like, oh shit, okay. People are coming to me for some sort of expertise in this at this point. So I kind of just experimented with it. There was one time I thought that maybe I might have come down with a cold because I had been microdosing and maybe it weakened my immune system, so I stopped. So anyways, people kept asking me, and I was like, I realized that was probably ridiculous. I probably had just gotten a cold and it had nothing to do with the microdosing. What I'm doing is you're taking a teeny little piece of stem. Like you have a bag of mushrooms. You're taking a teeny little piece and you're putting it in, you just kind of like swallowing with your vitamins. So I did that for 6 months, actually. I think nearly 7 months. I did it every third day, and I just stopped because I'm going to write another piece about this. I just stopped because I wanted to see, okay, if I do this for like 7 months, what happens when I stop doing it? And to give you a bit of effect, it's like the idea is that you're using it almost like caffeine or like a mild antidepressant. You're not really using it to get like a psychedelic experience. You're sort of like, and it's this weird idea that all these years people have been taking LSD as like, to have their minds completely blown, and that maybe just small doses of this thing can work, in the same way as Prozac or something like that. So I've been using psilocybin and trying not, because the majority of the other articles I've read about LSD, and I think it would be quite a bit harder to microdose on LSD, especially if you had you don't trust where it's coming from, one, and two, like I don't know how you would measure a microdose of LSD. And not only that, it's just been harder for me to find personally. Like I don't even have an acid hookup anymore. I did a few years ago, but yeah, I mean mushrooms. I've never really had that hard of a time finding mushrooms. In all honesty, like they seem to be readily available. So So yeah, no, and it gives you mild. Weirdly enough, it's very subtle when I was doing it every 3 days a day for 7 months, but you do absolutely feel it. And it's kind of like sometimes it comes in and out. It gives you kind of more energy and a mild state of euphoria. I took myself off of them, like I said, for the last like week and a half, and there was a couple days where I was like, like, I don't know if there was an effect for me coming off of it after doing it for 7 months, or if I just got used to having that and now it's not there. But I can definitely say last week at work there was a few days where I just felt overall sort of more tired than I'm used to feeling. So, I think it's promising, and hopefully that would definitely be, if there is something there, I think the next step in the drug war is getting psilocybin legalized. There's really no reason with marijuana, it's like that's just the logical next step is taking a look at that drug. LSD is a little more. LSD is more problematic, but ayahuasca and psilocybin, those drugs definitely. I've never even done ayahuasca before, and I've read about it. There's no reason these drugs are illegal because the real only practical purposes, the potential for abuse is low, and the only practical purposes are really for spiritual development and
they don't want that.
Yeah, exactly. They don't want that, but I think we'll be able to find a loophole. I would say in the next 10 years into some liberal state, potentially where I live, Washington. It's weird. Yeah. The reason where Washington has somehow gets these liberal policies through is because we're a state that's dominated by a city. Like Seattle is so much of the population of Washington State that we can actually get these weird bills through because it's just like it just has a more liberal voting base because Seattle is just and a lot of other. Like even California, even though there's California is even way lefty than us, they just have so much more population that's not in the cities that it's weird. So I think in the next 10 years still something. But anyways, microdosing, I recommend trying it. Like I said, I'm taking a tiny amount though. I had a couple of people message me. God, my one friend, I felt bad. Like, I just took a cap and I'm gonna go to work.
Oh my god, that's insane.
So I read your article on your first mushroom trip and how it changed your perspective on life. And so why do you think everybody does not have these types of experiences when they take psilocybin? And also, what do you think the cause of bad trips is? And then we'll wrap up the mushroom talk.
Well, set and setting is like one piece of that, definitely.
Set and setting, definitely one piece of it. This is the detective story that my life is. Why do I have such strong reactions to psychedelics? Absolutely right. This is the weirdest thing with me is. I started doing psychedelics. We're talking about my first psychedelic trip. I just realized that last fall that it had been 20 years. And why the same people that were taking, I was taking these drugs. It's not like I was doing these by myself when I was like a college student, when, I was like 18 years old. Like I had a bunch of other people that I was doing with, and I still know a lot of these people. Why am I writing about occult and shamanism? And these people have turned into like, some of the most materialistic people that I know, So, weirdly enough, I would say from my explorations in astral projection that there's a cycle of lives that goes into that, and I was somehow tied. Yeah, I was somehow tied to some sort of shamanic tradition. I mean, that's literally what I've been shown, that at some point in my cycle of lives, I was involved with some shamanic tradition. Otherwise, you can go into genetics. The other thing I will say is I am a very strange breed from a genetic standpoint because my dad is, a physician and was like valedictorian of his medical school. My mom is essentially fucking crazy. So it is this combination. No, and it's just true. Like she's, but functional crazy, but she's crazy. My parents got divorced when I was very young, and anyone that thinks that I'm like a rich kid because my dad's a physician too, I feel like no. It's like my dad remarried a woman that made sure I got exactly zero money. So didn't even pay for my college. So it's and I have an inherent distrust of rich people because of that. It's like I grew up in a family that didn't even want to give their own children fucking money even though they had it, which is insulting to us.
That's wild.
Yeah, a very large degree. But anyway, so there's this combination of my dad is somebody who totally exists in modern society and has his shit together, and my mom, she remarried and she didn't remarry, but she divorced and had another kid, and that kid is full blown. I have a half brother that is full blown, flat out schizophrenic, right?
Really?
So as crazy as you would talk. It's not together at all, and it's a really depressing scenario, and it makes you think about this kind of thing. But it never really occurred to me that much until. So from a genetic perspective, getting into it makes you think about genetics because, I hate to, if you read about UFOs and even sex magic in general, I mean, you're talking about how DNA is transmitted, and the idea is that there's something lurking behind the scenes that's been tinkering with our DNA from the jump. That's pertinent. I think there are a lot of people that are probably way better at the visionary side of things than I am, but it takes having that rational, logical, DNA to actually communicate this stuff in a way that other people would understand. Whereas I think most people might have these crazy experiences, but, get way further out than I ever could. But I somehow have the ability to actually communicate it to other people in a way that, they're not going to be like, that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And,
and definitely those people who have just been, like, since childhood have been raised on fear, and they put so much into their subconscious that when they do raise their vibration through these chemicals, all this stuff just rushes out and they freak out, and then there's other people who are just so happy-go-lucky that are like, yeah, man, I started to trip and I started to see eyes on all of the leaves on the trees and it was so cool. And like another person would fall in terror. But
that's another thing, when I talk about ties to an ancient shamanic tradition, it's weird because you get the occult, and, I'm the one that's always talking about karma, and, there's this dark negative vibe to the occult that you see. And I've had to ask my question like this. I mean, some of the stuff that I've seen, it's like, well, yeah, I mean, that would scare the shit out of absolutely most people. And yet, to me, I'm like, that's awesome, man. Yeah. Like, and why is that? I mean, it's like you can look at, like, the art of, say, H.R. Geiger or someone like that, It's really, like, terrifying, horrifying stuff, but there's a beauty to it. And, I mean, I can't deny that. I've seen some things that is like that, that's... Yeah, I can see how a lot of people seeing that would freak them the fuck out. So what is it again about me that I'm just like, it doesn't freak me out? I'm just like, yeah, awesome, sweet.
That definitely makes me more curious about genes, because I've always been so against the topic of being genetically deterministic on a lot of things, but that makes me a little more curious about
On that front, it's funny. I've used this reference in my writing or a couple times, but there's something to genetics. We can't deny that. I mean, we're talking about weed. When you're looking at what they're doing with genetics and weed, and breeding all this super weed now that it's legal. And not only that, I mean, I have a pug, right? And I don't know if you've watched these things on how we've domesticated wolves, but there's actually a really good show that you can. I should have the title of this before I tell people to go track it down. But it's about how they took wolves and they basically bred the aggression out of wolves in like one generation of wolves. And it's like scientists doing this. So it's like, okay, what we do is we go and we take the most docile wolves and we breed those two together, and in 2 generations you go from like a wild ass wolf to a wolf that is super sweet and nice to humans. So there's
that's crazy.
I have a pug, and a pug is like a little freak comedy dog, comedy, right? And it's awesome, and I love it. But like, how the hell did they take a wolf and make that out of it?
It's magic, man. It's magic.
So and this is again, you get into we are terrified of genetics, and again, it comes down to just like we're terrified of psychedelics. But if you read up on UFO stuff and alien contactee stuff, the idea what you're reading into is not that there's aliens. It's that there is some kind of force behind the scenes of our reality that has been manipulating genetics from the jump and has been consciously controlling our history and our evolution through genetics. And as I said, weirdly enough, when you get into the occult and sex magic, you're dealing with the same sort of shit, which is sexual energy. Where do people come from? They come with sex. There's this idea that if you get involved with sex magic, you can contact these extra-dimensional forms of intelligence, and it makes perfect logical sense that these things would be interested in our sex lives if they're controlling our DNA. So, I mean, again, it's not like this stuff doesn't add up. It's not like it's illogical. It's perfectly logical. It's just we're programmed from birth to think of it as illogical, which is as hard a barrier to get through as any. And I would say, like I said, I was summoned into this stuff. If that wouldn't have happened, there was still a part of me, even though I had all these weird experiences, and I read about this in my first book, that even though all these weird things happened to me, I still could not get it through my head that there was a reality. Like the part of myself that wanted to agree with society and be like, this is just a bunch of crazy bullshit, like it was still there, and it had to be sort of disabled by an external entity for me to really start pursuing and excelling this. And that's the point where I'm like, how would, as someone who wanted to educate someone else on how to do this stuff, I'm like, how you would do that? I don't know. Like something else did it for me. Like I could only suggest pushing yourself out there as far as you can, maybe asking for assistance, saying, hey, can you help me do this? Help me accomplish this? But I don't know, man. Yeah, it's some weird shit.
So to get away from the sort of drug aspect now, to get into the side that I really love, is more of the higher dimensional stuff. So I think the best place to start going through your work here is demon versus daemon. What is the difference?
Truthfully, it's just a linguistic.
Okay, so it's not like actually.
No,
it's
somatic. Yeah.
Okay, so it's just the spelling. It's not actually two different entity or essence.
You know, I actually put a K on the end of angelic as well to differentiate it, because I think, from what I've been shown, and that's the funny thing, you know, there's the typical societal definition of a shaman, and what I do is I put myself into altered states of consciousness and experiment and stuff, and then I write about what I try and literally go into the altered states and bring information that's helpful for society, and then put it out there. And you know,
so Terrence McKenna.
I mean, by that definition, if that's what you want, you know, a shaman, magician, or whatever. But some people define the shaman as someone who puts themselves into altered states and tries to bring out. That's literally what I do. My book is a bunch of me doing this and posting it right onto Facebook so people in real time can read this stuff and interact with it. I put and this is, again, the weirdest thing about me in getting into the occult is when I started doing magic, you started having this classic experience of, because the occult, it's this tradition, it involves contacting demonic forms of intelligence. And the reason I put the E there, I'm fine with the I as well. I put the E as well. I just started writing it that way. And it's just honestly to give it a distinction, because we associate angelic and demonic forms of intelligence as being good and evil. And our entire religious structure is based on that, and I really just put that letter in there to differentiate and say it's not that simple. These are in a lot of traditions, and when you go far back before it had been kind of overwritten by the popular Christian narrative of today, that the demonic forms of intelligence are teachers, and the idea that they're good and evil is just. The best thing I could say is you have to look at it from the more Taoist construct of yin and yang, that these are polar forces of creation. They're not...
Without one of them, we can't define the other.
Yeah, and again...
And they're integral to not only your psyche, but the universe, which I guess is the same thing.
Absolutely, yeah, and chaos, and there's dualities everywhere, and it seems simplistic, but then you realize, and I from the rational side of myself would think, that's too simplistic to think about things in duality, which it is to a large extent, and part of what I'm talking about, it's more complicated than good and evil, but there's dualities everywhere. You find a demonic versus angelic, chaos versus order, good versus evil, structure versus anti-structure, right versus wrong, and there's a problem with thinking that way, but there's something also primal about the nature of creation in that, and it's metaphorical.
Well, male and female is the very basic duality there is.
Exactly. It's the means against. There's something primal about the nature of creation. That there's something that day and night. Humans are divided into males and females. It's the combination of those DNAs that's where creation comes from. Is the combination. So there's something there. I put the E in demonic to say to separate it from the concept of good and evil, because I think as long as you look at these forces, I think that there are what we would call demonic or dark forces of dark energy and angelic or higher dimensional forces of light energy. But the more that you look at these things as being good and evil and being at war with one another,
you're sort of screwing yourself.
I think warring entities is a bad metaphor. Means of creation, like lovers who are trying to create something. Is a better metaphor than warriors fighting. Because anyways.
So would you say essentially like the demonic forces are like the spirit or the essence of the more materialistic virtues, and are there entities that are associated with these attributes that are working with or within our spirit? So, for example, if me, Chris, wants to master like my cravings or my greed or my anger, is there a specific entity that is with me personally on that, like that is that anger?
Well, first of all, we're getting into the kind of the power of negative thinking thing. But yes, from what I've been shown, and again, it's weird to experience this after you start playing around with magic. And then it's another thing to then read books written like 500 years ago now that are talking about the exact same thing that you've experienced. This was coming from your internal state. So yeah, I mean, from what I've been shown, and it's kind of a basic tradition that this is what, like, say, Abramelin writes about in the work of Abramelin the Mage, which is dates back to, like 1600 or something like that. And so he's writing about how everyone has a demonic and angelic guardian entity. I think the better way to look at it would be more from a perspective of chaos or of order, and that your demonic side is more your ordered side. As I was kind of talking about earlier, your angelic side is the side of light, is kind of more creativity,
and
chaos,
in there,
chaos, disorder.
So hold on. The anarchist side is angelic, and then the communist side is
well,
yeah, to a certain extent. And it's important to realize that, well, one, I mean, I also think we're in the lower realms, and this is what specifically. So weirdly enough, my pursuit into magic has largely enough. I've always been a really creative person, but it has largely been embracing, and which is I hate to say, like, there's all these I'm evil, Mr. Black Magic, douchebags on. EA Kenning. I don't want to talk about too much shit about those guys because, whatever. Like, that's their thing. They got into it. They're goths. They want to be in a horror movie. It's bad advice from my perspective.
That's the reality they want.
Yeah, it's they're making it, but that's not the world, and there's a reason nobody takes that shit seriously. It's that kind of imagery has been so damaging to the idea. There's some very interesting ideas in the occult, and that kind of, I want to be Mr. Captain Horror movie. It doesn't help move the narrative along. It makes nobody take this shit seriously. And that guy got arrested for meth, which is what I honestly think, if you go into magic with that mindset, there's this thing in tension. If you want to make your movie into a horror movie, you will. It'll work.
Exactly.
If you want to send the negativity, you can, and it'll work, and your life will turn to shit, and then you'll be like, oh, there's evil demons. But ultimately, it's like, that's what you fucking wanted, and they gave you what
exactly.
You asked for something, they gave you what you were asking for. It's like, oh, you want to live in hell? Have fun serving out a meth sentence in prison.
Yeah, literally. That's why I love the idea of heaven and hell as a mindset.
Yeah, exactly. So, and this is so when we're talking about angelic versus demonic entities. Yeah, really, what I've been shown is, and this goes back to astral projection in Weird's book. It's that weirdly enough, the biblical kind of cosmos is accurate from a perspective of astral projection. That there are higher realms, and it kind of goes back to Buddhism. And so that we live currently in a lower realm, and this lower realm is controlled by these demonic forces, so worldly order. And our world it's incredibly ordered, and nearly everything you do in our society, you are rewarded for doing boring, repetitive bullshit, like anything, And as much as it's fun to be a musician and create art, you hate to admit, like, in our reality, actually, like, focusing your shit enough to actually finish a fucking book, there's a level of structure that is required to do that. And finishing a record or whatever, and then promoting the record, there's all this fucking boring, repetitive bullshit that goes into doing anything. So it's like you got your angelic side that's higher dimensional, where ideas are limitless, and then molding that stuff into a form that's going to exist eternally, potentially in our world, is kind of the side of order. And I can say my pursuit of magic has been largely more about being like, hey, douchebag, it's nice that you want to make art and party all the time, but if you really actually want to accomplish your goals, you actually have to acknowledge, my demonic guardian. And same deal with, hey, not being a complete drunk all the time. Like, largely my demonic side that's like, hey, idiot, like, if you drink all the fucking time, like, that's going to ruin your life. So, that's going to create a level of chaos that if you actually, so again, we look at this stuff as evil, and yet we live in a society that worships this stuff. We live in the lower realms. Like, we worship, like, I think materialist scientism, this idea of reproducing things like the internet, that is some demonic lower level shit that comes with tons of repetition and focus that goes into accomplishing things like that. And that's sort of our demonic side, and that's not bad. We can't look at that as evil, but has it led to a lot of evil? Has it led to a lot of bad shit? Has it led to a narcotics epidemic? Has it led to an alcoholic epidemic? Has it led to wars? Yes! There is a dark side in that as well, and that's the problem with our culture, is we need to, realize, the more we focus on...
We need balance.
Yeah, well, we talked about this on one of our shows, and this concept of Wetico, and going into the idea that we need to start accepting the fact that we are capable of quote-unquote evil things, and start to accept those sides of ourselves as real, and not trying to suppress them and acknowledging them for the sort of integral part of ourselves. Because the more, and that's how Carl Jung's projection works, the more that you push down into yourself, the more it comes at you from your environment, because there is that fundamental psycho-spiritual need for that energy to be fulfilled, because it is an integral part of the universe.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and again, I think largely spiritually as a culture, it's weird. I mean, you could go and say that we worship, that our culture worships Satan or worships the demonic, and yeah, I mean, largely, I think you can make that argument that we are in hell.
Totally could.
We are in hell, and we do worship the demonic.
Look at all the symbolism in popular music.
Yeah.
Well, so you also say that occultism is actually about, quote-unquote, mastering your daemon and making contact with your holy guardian angel, and that has been chastised as demon worship. So, so mastering your daemon. So, okay, so here's the problem that I have here.
Gotcha.
And I'm going to go into this more sort of armchair magician, but I've, studied a bunch of, books and like authors and all these techniques, and they talk about, okay, now you will order these demonic forces to bow down to you and serve you and do all these things as your master. Yeah, okay, I get that I have, like, the spark of the creator that's inside me, but who the hell am I to be ordering around these demonic forces that are outside of time? Like, to me, it seems like they'll just be laughing in my face and just turn my life upside down and be like, dude, who do you think you are?
Yeah, it's funny you asked that question. I had a very God. You know what? I try and want to go into these podcasts to tell something that I've never really told anybody before. I just had an experience. I have another whole book that's coming out of Transmissions from Outside of Time, which will probably wrap up the Galactic Dialogue trilogy that I wrote, which is kind of the more autobiographical, and it's going to be largely about this relationship, because weirdly enough, partially because of the influence of Crowley on the Western occult. He's always talking about getting in touch with your holy guardian angel. If you read my rating, so the whole time I'm doing this stuff, thinking, I want to be talking to my guardian angel, and then I eventually realize, like, wait, I've been actually communicating with my guardian demon or daemon more than my angel half the time, and maybe that's more pertinent with what you're trying to do, because it's, he's the one that's like, okay, you need to get your life together, pull your shit together. You need to add a level of order to your life before you're going to be able to accomplish any of these roles. So
now, when you say you're in contact with them, what do you mean by that?
Okay.
A lot of people, hardcore skeptics, are gonna need an explanation.
Well, I mean, I have. God, I could go stories for hours on that. Let me tell you the one. So this is just
give one good example.
This is just such weird shit. So over the last several years, first of all, not only have I been shown in these states that I'm connected to an ancient demonic form of intelligence, but they've told me specifically what this form of intelligence is, and it's the daemon Enlil, who, if you check back, is in control. Basically is all the Sumerian creation myths and stuff like that. He's one of the prime movers. In fact, he's the one who was tasked with destroying, who largely wanted to destroy humanity in the flood, and it's his brother that sort of stepped in and was like,
we're scientist bro there.
Yeah, and then Enlil was sort of like, well, yeah, I guess you're right. It's probably a good thing we didn't kill everyone. So this isn't like the friendliest, demonic form of intelligence that I'm dealing with, admittedly. But it's like, again, there's the metaphor of that this is your father and mother, and that's where everybody has a father and mother. That's the metaphor there, is that everyone has their demonic guardian and their angelic guardian. That's just every single person has that. And so that's what I've been told is that, hey, why do I trip the fuck out when I take hallucinogens? Because I'm apparently tied to this ancient demon. This is what I've been told, right? This stuff sounds completely batshit insane to me, except, weirdly enough, my wife, the same thing was explained to my wife in sex transmission that I had, and I did a remote viewing experience where the other writer, Gabriel D. Roberts, I gave him the topic of my demonic guardian, and he came up with the exact same thing. So, it's so outlandish and so hard to believe, but I started intentionally creating a dialogue with this thing. And again, there's things that it's been showing me, like, it's really about control. What it's been showed is, and if you read the work of, say, Graham Hancock and whatnot, is that these things are literally, this is where our culture came from. If you look at, like, Sumeria, there's all these, like, monkeys, and all of a sudden culture comes out of nowhere. So
language, culture and language, they go hand in hand.
So the thing is, like, where did this come from? And what I've been basically being shown in no uncertain terms is that these demonic forms of intelligence stepped in and took control of thousands of humans at once to create our society. That literally these are entities that are ultimately sort of controlling thousands of people at once. And I've been shown again how exactly they do this. That from their perspective, they're looking into the subjective microverses of thousands of people at once, like it's like on a tablet TV screen. I just had this dream recently, like a tablet TV screen. And so you're kind of flipping through these forms of intelligence. And you tap on one and you go bam, and then you're in its head, and then for a brief period of time, you're controlling their life and manipulating their narrative in the direction that you want it to, completely unbeknownst to the person that this is happening to. And then you just leave back, and then you're back on your screen. So, weirdly enough, this is what I've been...
Sounds like the holographic theory.
Yeah, completely nuts. So basically, that our culture was seeded by demons. Again, we look at these things as evil, and what this is showing me, and this is, again, the angelic side of me sort of confirmed this. The angelic guardian is like, oh yeah, it looks awful from what you're saying, because I do these things like start wars and do all this awful shit. Yes, but they were doing it to create this level of order that creates things like the internet and, comic books and fucking video games and like all this cool shit.
Cars.
Yeah, cars. Like, it's like, and ultimately the message is all along, it's like, you're looking at it from the perspective that people, like, individual people matter. And we call them demons and we associate them as evil. And that's what they're sort of saying. It's like, to us, individual people, they're just like little numbers on a fucking screen that we're fucking with,
Okay, so mastering your demon, essentially, how I'm understanding it, mastering your demon or daemon is sort of like communicating with these forces whose plane, like whose plane we are on. So it's like walking into somebody else's house who they own and they master, and sort of asking them, okay, you're the master of this sort of gross world. Yeah. How can I not conquer it, but how can I sort of get my materialistic side of myself in check so I can move up the ladder?
Well, personally, when you're talking about moving up the ladder, now you're talking about your angelic form of intelligence, because now, so more, okay, so angelic from the higher
balance. So how can you help me balance my material side, and those demonic forces will help you do that, and then you go to your angelic side and say, how can I balance my angelic side? Because, even in the Bhagavad Gita, it talks about, we always want to not accrue bad karma, but accruing good karma keeps you in the cycle too.
That's, I've been shown something very specific, and I think it would differ, but essentially, the goal is for, and as far as karma, I had this vision years ago where it was, what people would call a life review, and it was showing me that all this negative karma kind of just, and again, it was in a very specific way, and that was the strangest thing about this. It showed me essentially that negative karma was holding me to the lower dimension, and yet your positive karma was sorting you help ascend to the higher dimension, and but it was very bizarre because it showed how much most of the karma of your actions exists completely outside of your ability to
control.
See. Moreover, what it was showing me. Moreover, though, what it was showing me was that, and this is way before anybody ever read my writing or anything, and this is, what it was showing me is that if you put yourself in, like, a sphere of public influence, like, you're responsible for all the shit you don't see. Like, if you come on television and, ban gays, you're not gonna, in your daily life, you're not gonna see all, say you create a movie that pisses people off, anything. Basically, it was showing that you're responsible for your actions, even though you don't see this. And if you put yourself in a public, as a person of a public figure, or you make a piece of art that becomes successful, or even marginally successful, you're responsible. That's still a direct result of your actions, and you're responsible for all this excess karma. Like, you just created a karma swath by doing that, and you have to answer for all of this shit. And that's sort of what it told me. And the potential to have a great karmic swath if you do that is high, but you're also going to have a lot of fuck-ups of like, well, I didn't mean for that to happen, but that is something bad that happened that's the direct result. So anyways,
that the fifth dimensional map of consequences?
No, so that's an experience. So I was shown this fifth dimensional map of consequences, and that's been the basis for how I've
both ways. Goes towards the demonic map and the angelic map.
And absolutely. And so what I would say is that if you summon a demonic form of intelligence and you were like, oh, I want to rule the world, I want to be rich or famous, that would potentially work, but ultimately they're going to look at you like you're completely missing the fucking point.
So then what do you ask it then? And this ties into another part of this all is, okay, so one, what is the thing that you gotta be asking it? And two, how do you do it so that you can stay grounded and you don't turn into a schizo-neurotic freak?
Man, this is the other thing. Yeah, I mean,
because that seems to be the whole key of all of this is how do you stay?
Based in this reality?
Yeah.
When you have so much exposure, so those the other aspects.
Two parts. What exactly do they want you to be asking them for assistance in? And two, how do you do it so that they don't screw with you?
They don't screw you over. This is the problem, because again, I get so many people, and I've started writing about, how to do kind of magical instructional thing recently in a series. If you Google advanced sigil projection, that stuff will come up. And part of the reason I did that is because I've read other magic books, and I've been forced to come to the reality that, just telling people to go around and just play around with this stuff isn't necessarily the greatest idea, because you can, in fact, fuck up your life with this stuff.
And I will share one story as soon as you're done.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and to a certain extent, I've had to confront the fact that I've done some things with magic that have fucked up my life to a certain extent. I don't think terribly badly in my mind, but, they've put me on a trajectory that I think there is kind of like an optimal trajectory that you can take in life, and I think I've requested some things very specifically that have put me on a trajectory that's like, it's a good one, but it's it's a little tedious, and again, the best, and weirdly enough, I read Bramwell and the Mage, a few years ago, and he talks about this. The best you can do is, I advise putting an intent and putting in a very broad intent, and the intent would be to help the spiritual development of the universe and help alleviate pain in this dimension and make things in heaven as they are on earth, and to try and help this lower dimension is, and you can do it from a certain selfish perspective and say, well, I think a lot of people, it's true. You can't really help others unless you're.
Yeah, so it's like, can you help me start this business so it comes back to the point in that article, the advanced sigil projection, that I really like, that a lot of, there'll be another
one up next week. I got more coming. I've been a little busy and gotten sick and shit, so.
Sweet.
But yeah,
so, Gordon White doesn't really put in is that map out a timeline. So don't just ask for your business, but create a sort of timeline of what that business is going to look like and what that's going to have you do, so that when you do it, there's. I think initially, if I was in my experience with magic, I think that's what I wrote about in the last piece that I wrote. Is I think if you wanted probably the best practical application for magic, and from what I've seen, is there are a lot of people that it's our culture. You're constantly bombarded with advertising and pressure from family to have kids and get a job and that's fine. And I think that you want to have that structure in your life in most cases, but ultimately there is this what am I supposed to be doing with my life? There's got to be something that you're not getting paid for that you're doing because, or maybe it doesn't mean you couldn't potentially get paid for, but there's something that you should be doing, whether that's being a really good dad or working with underprivileged kids or being an artist or being a lecturer. I do the creative things, but I think there's a lot of people in our society that don't have that side of themselves. There's that spiritual side of there's something that I should be doing with myself that I don't really know what that is. And I think doing spells if you are first getting into magic, those are probably, if you are, feel like that in your state, doing spells will reach inwardly. And you can use psychedelics and use inward focus or use meditation. And the idea is, give me some direction. What is the point of this life? Where is the narrative? Where do I tie in? What can I be doing? And once you figure that out.
What is my personal journey?
Yeah, what's my personal journey? Yep. And once you figure that out, then your magic should sort of be okay, help me do this stuff that I'm supposed to be doing, right?
And I like Gordon White's perspective in his new book, Chaos Protocols, where he says, start to project for higher probability. Higher probability options. So rather than saying, hey, give me, doing a sigil that says, I have a successful business. That is so contingent upon so many other things coming to toe, but rather saying, I have a more solid network of people.
Yeah. I honestly think this has been my experience, not like what I thought, because I would sort of think, I think the less specific you are in your intent, the better. It's more about getting in tune with what you're supposed to be doing. And really enough, I could go on the kind of model of the third, fourth, and fifth dimension, the model of the Holy Trinity. So it's kind of like merging all these parts of your soul that have been projected into one consciousness or one entity that's working together and trying to, help raise the consciousness of the species. And yeah, in my experience, the more specific that I've been with my sigils, the more I've sort of fucked myself over. Like when I've said, I want this person, this specifically, and weirdly enough, I can say that I was sort of warned in a couple of these occasions.
Yeah.
Like, put yourself, the main thing is, like, if you're going to do something that's more specific, put yourself in a state, and before you execute the spells, like, ask, like, be like, hey, is this a good idea? And if you get the vibe that, like, no, that's not the best idea, then don't do it. Because, this is where I
trust your instincts.
Yeah, I've run into this a couple times where I've sort of forced the issue, and I've been like, I want this to happen. And what I've been told is, like, we can do that, like, that'll work. But it's not, it's not optimal, like, they tried to kind of, but it's like, yeah, it's your free will. If that's what you want to do, we'll help you do it, And there was one time in particular when I thought about doing something, I was told flat out, like, no, don't do that. There's been a couple times
it's
don't
like, no.
do that. Like, and it was like, okay, so the best advice I could offer, just make it less specific, have it kind of more about what you can do to, serve the greater good of the consciousness. And of course, I would talk about that, and so many occultists would be like, that's a bunch of New Age bullshit. And I'd go and point out that, Aleister Crowley was trying to base his magic around, who I don't like at all, by the way. Aleister Crowley was trying to base his magic around a Bremlin. But by weirdly synchronous circumstances, ended up reading the Book of a Bremlin. And a Bremlin says this over and over again. What I'd said long before I ever a Bremlin was that you're supposed to be doing this. Well, one, it goes back to the cosmology that I've seen, that we are all connected, and that remote viewing and like Young, that we are, in fact, of one plot line, one storyline, and you're connected to everybody. So aspects of karma, and if you're not doing magic to help the collective plot line of the species...
then what the hell are you doing?
A Bremlin says this over and over and over again. If you read the Book of a Bremlin, he says that more than he just keeps saying it. Like, just like if there's one thing he wants you to
drill it
understand,
into your head.
Yeah, he's just like, I'm going to repeat this over and over again, because this is the most important thing that you need to know when you're doing magic, is that it has to be doing it for the greater good. If it's not, it's going to blow up on you in some way. And weirdly enough, my experience with magic has been a lot of like pointing out to me, it's like, is that really for the greater good, or is that just your bullshit? It's like, is that why you wanted that? So
since your encounter with the entities who showed you the sort of fifth dimensional map of consequences, how have you personally altered your awareness or behavior to a point where you're not creating more or as much of this lower binding karma?
Oh man,
what have you done personally?
I can just trust my guardian entities. What I've been forced, I was talking about the kind of fifth dimensional map of consequence, and weirdly enough, that happened. I guess I got to look at the bright side, because essentially what they were showing me was that the more you do put yourself in the public sphere and the more of an influence you become on others, you have this greater karmic swath, and there's a greater potentiality to raise yourself to a higher dimension. But it was sort of also showing me, straight up, like, there's going to be consequences to that are negative, that you're going to have to deal with, that you could have never foreseen or, never known, Like, so, weirdly enough, and like I had that vision long before, at that point, I don't know, maybe there was like a couple hundred people listening, like bands that I was in, and now I'm not big by any stretch of the imagination, but I do, like, fuck man, I spend like 2 hours of my week just answering weird spiritual questions that people send me on my Facebook and talking to people, and people do me read my writing. It's not like a substantial amount, but it's a lot of people. It's more than I can conceive of for my consciousness. So yeah, there is a point of me that's always just like, what the fuck, what did I do? I was like, it's like, but it really makes me think like, oh shit, like if I'm in like in a shitty fucking mood, like I don't want to go just like blast about a bunch of fucking negative shit on the internet, because man, people will read that and that's going to have consequences that I'm going to have to deal with it, you know. So it really makes you think about that. And then there's someone like me though that's like, I don't know, I mean, this is what I was supposed to, you know, like that's what I do. I have this ability to, you know, write and do these things, and like there was no real doubt that this is what my inner self wanted me to do. But does it make me think that I've damned myself to this dimension for a longer period of time than if I would have just been some monk living in the woods? Yeah, no, I definitely think about that. And yes, there's a part of me that thinks, I don't know, how do you lessen the lower dimensional karma? And I would say that you think really carefully. You choose your words really carefully to the best of your abilities. You choose your actions.
We lived pretty close to Salem, Mass. And
I grew up in Salem.
I was in this, you know, new age bookshop just looking at some magic books, and this like, you know, middle-aged dad and his wife and his like 3 kids in the shop, and I'm like, strange. And the youngest kid is looking at the magic books, and I'm like, okay, interesting. And the kid goes, Daddy, look, this is the one that I want. Kid pulls out the friggin' 2,000-page Golden Dawn book, and I'm like, oh my, like in my mind, I'm like, kid, what are you doing? Like, I was so close to actually saying, are you sure about that? But you know, it comes down to how much can we interfere, you know, because that kid's got his own plot line to his life. But then again, I do think about what, you know, not saying like, hey, are you sure about that? Do you have any idea what you're doing right now?
No, and that's exactly it. I've seen it myself in my life, and I've done some pretty innocuous stuff that has kind of, you know, got myself into some weird corners. And yeah, man, you said you had a story about magic going wrong. I've had a lot of people tell me these stories over the years, and that's something. And again, I started writing about this stuff on the internet. This doesn't occur to me. This didn't occur to me when I was doing it, or I wouldn't have done some of the things. But yeah, you do start getting into this, and this is why when I'm talking about like how to do magic, I'm talking about intent. I'm like, make this stuff. You're not going to fuck up your life with some simple basic stuff, you know. If you're looking at, you know, like, I want to meet the love of my life, I want to improve my situation, but again, it should be done with, I want to improve the situation of the whole, and you have to live up to that. You know, if you get what you want, you got to live up to that end of it. I think if you're,
or you're going to face the consequences.
Exactly. I think if you're framing your intent in that regard, you're pretty good. But the more you get into specifics, the more you get into greedy shit, you can really fuck yourself up, man. Like you can. I fucked myself up slightly doing things that were really, really well intentioned, in all honesty. And so if you start doing stuff that's malicious and for really selfish reasons and for really petty reasons, even if it's sometimes even for good reasons, if you're like, I really want this thing to happen, it might happen, and then it's like, man, your life went into a bad direction because you want that to happen. That really isn't what you wanted to happen, you know. You have to
it's like that old monkey paw story. The 3 wishes. The monkey paw, and every time you wish for $1 million, and the next thing you know, your dad dies, and you collect the insurance money on him. And it's like, that's not what you wanted, but you got your $1 million. You know what I mean?
Oh, exactly. And weirdly enough, when I had this kind of vision of the 5th dimensional map of consequence, which was these spirit entities showing me, again, it's like way before I ever conceived of it as the demonic and angelic guardian. It was ultimately my demonic guardian was showing me, here's all the shit you fucked up, and the angelic guardian was like, oh, no, you did all that, you did great, you know. You did great, but you're still here because of this shit you fucked up, you know. But when it instantly, just like you said, I mean, it's all in the literature, and we have stories and fables in our fiction like about this stuff. But I mean, ultimately, what I was shown is the nature of a deal with the devil. You know, oh, hey, I want to be a multimillionaire, and you get this job, and you get promoted, and you end up becoming a billionaire by laying all these people off or profiting off the war machine. What they're not showing is that you made your $1 million. When you die, that's all coming back at you. You know, that is your influence. You did these things. You signed that thing to sell these fucking bombs. You did that. That's all coming back at your ass, you know? And not only that, even say you were, hey, I want to be a pop star. I use, you know, sometimes like, you know, Eminem as an example, you know, like, I'm not an Eminem fan. I don't want to talk too much shit. Like, I just don't like the guy. But like, there was a long time where, you know, he's like publicly displaying, you know, his lyrics about, you know, being a narcotics addict. I know that most of the narc addicts that I've known are huge fans of his work. And, you know, it's like this glamorous glamorizing narcotic addiction and shit like that.
Yeah, or like stabbing his wife and beating women. Yeah, he glamorized a lot of bad things.
He glamorized a lot of bad things, and that has an effect. Like, that works. Now, like, there's all this horrible comment on you. That shit is going to be behind you here for centuries. It's that pact from the devil. It's like, okay, you wanted to be a famous position. If you get into that position, guess what? You just sort of dug yourself a
I think a lot of people are doing that.
That's wicked real, man.
Yeah.
So I have...
Oh, hey, man, it's funny, Hunter S. Thompson. Like, I'm sitting here like, oh, I want to be a drunk like Hunter S. Thompson. You know, it's weird to think, like, that's partially on him. You know, he put himself out there as a successful drug addict, and obviously people are going to want to emulate him, and, you know, it's on him. Yeah,
so I have about maybe 4 more questions outside of your book. The story that I wanted to share is a sigil story. So Mike actually, got me onto a lot of this path, and when Mike first showed me sigils, he showed me Gordon White's article on sigils, and when I found out about this, I'm like, whoa, this is cool. This is cool. But at the time, I was very naive in my intentions, maybe a little bit reckless and a little bit too much in my ego. So I was in college, UMass Amherst, and I find out about these things. Obviously, I want to dive in and create one. So here's what my intention was. My intention that I wrote was, I want to be abducted by an alien.
Yeah.
And I wrote it out, you know, because thinking, starship comes down, they pick me up, and we could go off. So I wrote it down, you know, did the whole cross-out bit, made it, and I made it look all occulty. Yeah. And I can't remember I don't think I burned it, but I might have, because I think that's how I learned first. But, so I did it, and I activated it. That was that. Time goes on. Maybe 3 days passes. And I go to my psychology class, you know, just another day. Big 450-person little lecture hall. And you tend to see the same faces. But I, you know, being the student I am, I love to sit right up front. So I sat in the first row, and... which I normally do, and my professor, you know, he's teaching, and he asks the class some cool questions. And this one question, I had this very, you know, desire to answer. You know, when I feel like I have an answer that is beneficial to the class, you just want to raise your hand. Yeah. So I raise my hand, I get it out, class goes on, class ends. Then this fucking girl comes up to me. This girl out of nowhere, about 5'1", like gray hair. It looks straight out of like a Hansel and Gretel like comic or something. Like, just looks weird, like it's wearing really old clothes. And she's like, "Hey, I really appreciated your answer." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, cool, thanks." And we talk for a couple minutes. I forget if she came up to me the next class day, because somehow we exchanged numbers, and she was not attractive in the least bit. Like, I was not, you know, planning on trying to get at her. Yeah. And so somehow I get her number. I can't remember if it was for like a study group. A couple of days later, we're texting, and she's talking about because the question in class was about sort of like Carl Jung and the subconscious, so we start talking about like spiritual topics, and I'm just a very spiritual person. I can relate it to pretty much anything. Then this girl goes, "Hey, have you ever heard of astral sex?" And I go, "What?" "Oh yeah. She talked about a meditation circle that her for friends do." And she's like, "Have you ever heard of astral sex?" And I'm like, why? And she's like, "Oh, in our circle, we like go to the astral realm and we have sex." I'm like, "What?" stop talking to this girl immediately, get rid of her number, and I go to my little circle, and I'm just praying, please, I'm sorry, just take this away, I didn't mean it, just turn back everything that I did, and I'm done. I never saw that girl again. She just poof. I never made eye contact. I never saw her in that class.
Well, no, she never came back to the class, right?
Yeah, and that was crazy to me. That was like, whoa.
That is phenomenally trippy. And yeah, no, I agree. No, that's and this is what we don't get enough of it is in magic writing is like there's so much about how to do this stuff and so not nearly enough about how it works and stories about like what happened when you did it. And that's like a classic story. Yeah. So you cast this thing to have, be abducted by aliens essentially. And then you meet this girl that probably could have made that happen for you.
I'm saying because, you think that, yeah, these aliens are going to come down on their shit, but it took a totally real route. Like I could have been like, astrally parasited and like astrally abducted, not like bodily abducted. So that just goes to show how like what we think is just totally not on par with reality. Like
no, well again, there's been. And it is funny because, with alien stuff, like, for now, like, even mainstream scientists, like, that's how they explain it away. They're like, oh, it's just sleep paralysis. It's just sleep paralysis. And then there's, like, someone like me who's like, well, sleep paralysis is the gateway to astral projection. And then you're getting into, there's always this association between the occult and sex magic. And, that's the shit you're getting into. Astral projection, sex magic, when you read about alien contact phenomena, say, Strieber particularly, who talks about this, I mean, that's really what you're talking about.
Yeah.
What it That's a great story though, man. So basically, what's funny is that it worked and you kind of balked. You said you wanted to be abducted by aliens, and then they like presented it with you. It's like, okay, if that's what you want, here you go. And I'm like, no, fuck that, I don't want that.
yeah, because I would prefer some cool shit to happen, not like some like backwards backdoor secret, not knowing what you're doing, which is the reality of it.
Things are changing. It's like it's easier to get this, it's harder to hide this information these days. Not only that, like Bernie Sanders wouldn't have done, the media was against him from the jump. Like, the only reason he did as well as he did was because of social media. So it is changing. The media can't just lie to everybody anymore because now there's social media, which is sort of keeping it in check. And we need that because the weirdest thing about, getting into this stuff, and it's weird with me because I got a degree in psychology, and then after I graduated, I sort of, I had a job working with developmentally disabled adults, and a lot of it, there was a lot of downtime because a lot of it was just kind of babysitting. And so for the next, 4 years while I was working in that field, I sort of gave myself this graduate degree. I read so much because I had all this time on the clock to read, and I read about all the stuff I wanted to read about as a psychology student that couldn't. So I kind of gave myself an unofficial grad degree in quote unquote weird shit. And so you go this reading, and what you realize is the more you go into this, I have this experience all the time with my writing is people are constantly being like, hey, have you ever tried this? Hey, have you ever read about this? Hey, have you ever tried this? Have you ever read about? And I'm like, no. There's all these avenues, all these esoteric spiritual practices that have been completely edited out of our cultural, of our media, academic, and religious institutions. It's just been completely whitewashed. The entire history of human visionary experience has just been completely whitewashed off the agenda of academia, of the media, and of religion. So, how do we edit that back in? I've been shown that this is
podcasts like this.
Yeah, exactly. Writing like I do, you can only hope that eventually, we'll be able to get it to a point where people aren't as ignorant to this stuff as and it's funny because I was talking about Monroe earlier, and that's the hilarious story about him. He starts spontaneously having these out-of-body experiences, and then he goes to talk to a psychologist to be like, what the fuck's wrong with me? And his psychologist is like, oh, people have been talking about this for hundreds of years. Here, read. It's it's not something they acknowledge, but it's always been there.
So another question from Mike is, how do you go from being a well-studied armchair magician for years to finally practicing? Is there value in the learning of is there value in learning or practicing traditional ritual magic, or should you just skip all the BS and go straight to chaos or practical magic?
I Well, here's the thing with magic. Yeah, I have a respect for ritual magic. I think it could do a lot of things. My personal opinion is that it is just consciousness has changed so much since the time where that made any sense. That we grow up now in a world that is just so different than that. And I'm an example.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
I think the ritual helps with people's beliefs on it.
Yeah.
Like the whole ritual helps create the experience and belief needed to power the magic itself. And I think that's why some people will benefit from ritual magic compared to chaos magic.
I think you're right about that. I mean, yeah, I think definitely. I think if you're more of a technical thinker, ritual magic can make sense. But there's a great philosophies and ideas that come from it. I've always been more of the chaos school, and it's been all about kind of subjectively fitting it, which I think there's really something there, because this comes again from the kind of astral projection end where, as far as like telepathic spirit communication, it is communicating in a very subjective manner. They're like, when you're talking about communicating with spirit entities, they're communicating it, they're literally seem to be scanning your own mind. I mean, this is what I was shown. Yeah. And like, seeing the contents of your own mind and then communicating with you in a way that makes sense to you based on what exists in your mind. So I think that's the value of chaos, is you really are formatting it to your invention. And I think people like Grant Morrison and myself have shown that if the idea is to make contact with your guardian entities, you can do that from a chaos standpoint. Like, there's nothing in ritual magic specifically that would absolutely require that this would happen. But then again, I mean, I think there's value in that. I recommend the chaos kind of current and really subjectively, but I've never tried the ritual stuff.
Yeah,
so I don't know. I would have to really try that to definitively say.
So what's your take on, I mean, do you think there's any value to these in modern times, like for fraternities and like magical orders in the modern times? Like, do you think there's any value to them now?
I got to be honest. In general, the more that I've read about that stuff, it's weird. I was kind of summoned into magic, and the more I read about it, the more, and so I even went online and started writing about it. Like, oh, isn't magic cool? And the more I've gotten into it, the more I've been like, oh yeah, it's not. It's actually pretty lame. And most of the shit I've read about magical orders, it really, I don't like the hierarchical structure of it. Mm-hmm. The way, this person is above you, and you have to do these rituals so you get to the point where you can. I mean, that seems to create nothing but fucking weird competitive bullshit. I'm not saying there's not something to the structure of that, but I gotta be honest, the more I've read about the history of the occult, it just seems like a bunch of fucking power mad dudes fucking
Well, yeah, they want to stay in control of it, and that's where chaos they don't want the chaos magic because it's like personal in comparison to their rituals. In
magical orders, yeah, I mean, not only that, you're also dealing with the fact that a lot of people that get into this stuff get into it precisely because they like the dark horror movie imagery. Totally. And then you're getting into some bad vibe shit where these people are intentionally summoning negativity. I mean, yeah, sadly enough, if people ask me, hey, I want to get involved in my magic order, my advice would be stay the fuck away from that shit. I would say start doing your own shit. Absolutely find some people that are on your page, but avoid the weird hierarchical structure shit. Like that, nothing good really seems to come from that.
Nope.
But my experience, yeah, I think, and again, I think it's there for a reason. It probably came from the spirits at some point. There is probably some value to that. It just, it seems to cause more problems than it causes good, as far as I can tell.
So, one, have you sort of devised a method for holy guardian angel contact? And two, like, just personally, from like, just a personal perspective, do you ever like just step back and question yourself, like, am I fucking losing it? Like, am I crazy, or is this really it? Like, or like, how do I define crazy? Like,
the weather, and that's I think where I differ from a lot of people. I think even when I read someone like Graham Hancock or a lot of people, they're still lost in this. Is it real? Is it all just in your head? And I'm one person that's going to definitively say, like, no, it's whatever you're contacting with. There's a part of your imagination. Basically, the human imagination is just far more expansive than we currently give it credit for, and you can tap into these parts of yourself, and it just blurs the line between the external world originates from the internal world, and so the idea of dividing it into concepts of real and not real is really something that blinds us and limits us to acknowledge that everything that you see in the external world originated as a thought in somebody's head in the first place.
Exactly, so, we lose track of that a lot.
Yeah, and so I'm one of the people that's like, no, it is real, but ultimately dividing into real and not real isn't the question. There is parts of us which remote viewing has shown, which I demonstrate in my book, like something that you're communicating knows things about your world that you don't know, and that's just the way it is. And there's a reality to that. Is it easy to reproduce? No. And part of the problem with trying to think about it in a more kind of scientific, like we need to do that to place it in a more materialistic kind of view, because we just haven't. We've applied zero logic to studying this stuff at this point in human history. We've put no resources into it. Everything that we've done, we've just said, you're crazy. We've questioned it way too highly. People are under such high scrutiny, even though they've gotten results. So we need to study in that way. But ultimately, what this stuff should be telling us is that reality can't be understood in that way. You have to look at it from a perspective of more art, from a subjective perspective. And yeah, I mean, there's definitely times where I came to terms a while ago, and it's a hard thing to do. That our society thinks is crazy, and I talk about stuff that most people would think that I'm a complete fucking lunatic, and yet ultimately it's me. And I think Terence McKenna has helped me with this too. Like what I really like about Terence, a lot of his ideas are, I think, a little out there. But especially like his time wave zero and whatnot. But I think more than anything, there's a value in pointing out. It's like, no, I'm not crazy. Our culture is fucking crazy. But if you're trying to tell me that this stuff doesn't make sense, like, no, it does. It makes perfect logical sense. I mean, the idea that there's been a hidden force behind human history manipulating our genetics from the jump, there's nothing about that is irrational or it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, or even the idea of sex magic. There's nothing irrational about it. It makes sense. Like, the most powerful thing I can imagine is the female-male interaction. It creates lives. It creates us.
Exactly. It's not that this stuff is irrational. It's we've been programmed to think that it isn't.
To think it is. Yeah, absolutely. You know what's rational? Going to war. Going to war with every country on the planet. That's rational.
That's exactly it. So I guess my point is, like, I'm one of the people that most people will still kindly retreat into that. Oh, maybe it's real, maybe it's not real. I'm like, no. Our culture is fucking insane. It has repressed this stuff.
That's how I feel.
We made hallucinogens. I got into this stuff because of hallucinogens. How'd that work out? I love it when materialist people like to talk about rationality and stuff. It's like, how rational is it to take a kind of chemicals and say, you can't even study that, because that's what we did with hallucinogens. We didn't just say
how scientific are you really?
We didn't just say you can't use that recreationally because that's dangerous to you. We said you can't even study that. Same thing with Reich's techniques about orgone energy. People forget this. Like, that guy's research was literally made illegal and shut down. And these materialist kind of scientist people like love to talk shit to Christians. I'm like, oh, you and your primitive fairy tales and your superstitions. I'm like, you're the one that's superstitious. You're so superstitious against shamanism. You made it fucking illegal. Not only did you make it illegal, you made it illegal to even study it. You said, this stuff is so dangerous that you can't even study this shit. And by the way, you can study every other kind of chemical compound. We live in a society that's, better living through chemistry. Let's get all our kids hooked on Ritalin. Everybody should be taking SSRIs. And yet there's this whole area of compounds that you said, can't study that, it's fucking dangerous, man. So anytime people are talking about
Adderall.
Yeah, exactly. I have to be the one that's militant, and weirdly enough, it's like, people got to fight for their rights, and being inspired by the civil rights movement, the gay rights movement. At some point, shamanic people, and I'm not going to do it with violence, but I'll do it with my magic and my writing and whatever talents I can. But at some point, people have to start fighting back, right? And there's a person like me. It's like you're going to be like, oh, is it real? Is it crazy in your head? And I'm like, no, it's not. It's not. Your society is fucking crazy. The fact that at this day and age, like, there's things like astral projection that we've done no studies on, that we have hallucinogens that barely anyone has studied, that chaos sigil magic, nobody has studied this stuff. It's the rational part of me that's like saying, until you can show me any kind of research into these things that I've experimented with, all you can really ultimately say is these are vast areas of knowledge that we have never studied in any sort of rational. The military financed psi phenomenon for years, and some of the most compelling results in psi phenomenon are military's remote viewing experience.
They have a whole movie on it.
Yeah, and then again, but what's so bizarre is when you look at the research, there's something there. The problem is the military wanted to weaponize it, and it couldn't be weaponized. And then it comes to someone like me to point out, like, maybe it didn't want to be weaponized. Maybe that's the point, is that you're dealing with a kind of intelligence, and they're like, you're really missing the point if you're really trying to turn this into weapons. It's like, if you're using this to weaponize it, and not only that, it's just like, it's been buried, and it's at some point, we have to start saying that editing, the idea that you can understand reality without taking subjective experiences into consideration is just preposterous. It's like that is such a bizarre, incomplete, irrational, superstitious way of looking at the world that, it comes from imperialism and we got to fight it. And it takes, people like me standing up saying, and I said earlier in the podcast, I think part of, I do have to wrap this up. I think part of what I do is I take things so far out into left field that hopefully by taking things so far out into left field, then, the other side slowly inches in that direction, and I do think because academics are so restrained with what they can do with research into psychedelics that it takes me, somebody not existing in the academic world, to be like, you can push this thing way further than you guys are thinking it can go.
So Nate's got one last one, and then we're all done.
All right. Yeah. So one last question, real quick. What is the easiest form of magic even the biggest skeptic can do to prove magic to themselves?
So even the biggest skeptic, man, I would say ayahuasca. I got to be honest, and this is where I've never done ayahuasca. I would say ayahuasca or DMT. I have never done any of those things, and then weirdly enough, I wanted to tie that in. Like what I do blends the realm of shamanism and the occult, and which differs it from most of the occult. As I find out, it's like most of what other people are talking about are not developing a relationship with psychedelic drugs, which is what I've been doing. To a large extent. And from what I've read about things like DMT and ayahuasca, it seems like those chemicals have the potential to take someone who is a materialist and turn them into a non-materialist, like kind of overnight. And we were talking about ritual magic, and I think the Western esoteric tradition has lost sight of the shamanic tradition. And it just seems to me that you could spend months and years like studying specific rituals, and it seems like if you wanted to contact another form of intelligence, just taking ayahuasca would have a more intense effect than all that ritual magic that you try. Like, I'm sorry. It's just like straight up. It seems like that's an easier route to getting there than to spend months and months and months learning how to do this ritual in a specific way. Or you could just go to Peru and participate and make sure you seriously vet the shaman you're working with or whatever. But it seems like that stuff seems pretty consistent. That if the goal is to try and have a contact experience with another entity, it seems like psychedelic drugs are an easier way of doing that than ritual magic, and an easier, maybe not as again coherent. Maybe you won't get as coherent because I do think psychedelic it's speaking. You're dealing with something that's speaking in a language that you're programmed sort of not to understand. So understanding the information that you gather during a psychedelic experience isn't necessarily the easiest thing in the universe. But yeah, I think if you're a true skeptic, I've wrote a bit in this. I've never done ayahuasca or DMT, but what I've read, it seems like those can produce the same sort of states that I get doing LSD, like this kind of contact encounter with, you're communicating with something larger. That seems to be the easiest, most repeatable way of doing those things at this point, as far as I can tell. So
that thank you for taking time out of your schedule to come to talk to us.
Yeah, we appreciate
maybe
it.
sometime.
So
maybe sometime in the future you can come back on, like maybe for your next book. But we're very appreciative.
Thanks for having me on, and let me just plug some brief stuff.
Sure.
Writing on disinfo, a book right now called Transmissions from Out of Time. It's a lot about psychic dreams, things like that. Highly recommend it. It's only $5 on Amazon. Facebook, Thad.McKraken is my writer page, which my friends are maxed out, but you can hit me up there. And DMI Occult, bandcamp.bandcamp.com if you want to check out music that I've made. I was talking about shamanic music earlier. Definitely. And thanks for having me on, and I wish I could keep going on with this stuff, but I do got to head out here.
Sure, man.
And you guys have a great Sunday. Let me know when it's up for sure.
All right. Have a nice day.
You too.
Thank you very much.
There we are, people. Holy hell. The podcast session from another universe.
I think it was good stuff. Even the most hardcore skeptic can at least enjoy entertainment value out of it.
Yeah.
If you are going to try anything you said, just make sure your intentions are right.
And make sure you don't go jumping into the Golden Dawn as your first thing. That's just insane.
But another thing is we never brought up what a sigil is, and I think a lot of people listening may not know.
Sigil. It's just a magical tool. We'll post up a link to Thad's post on making sigils. We'll post up a link to Gordon White's post on making sigils. very helpful. The one thing you don't want to do is make a sigil to be abducted by an alien because that might happen. But it's a magical tool. I think is one of the basic ways to start doing magic practically. You know, try it out. Do your research first before you do it, and just do an experiment. You know, I think people need to start experimenting with their consciousness more.
Yeah, before dismissing.
True, you know what I mean? Like, especially for psychedelics, you know, even marijuana is considered a hallucinogen. I'm an advocate for people trying out these things. Don't be encased by fear. Don't be encased by what other people have been made to fear, and now they try to make you fear. It's your consciousness. You're free to do it, but just do it safely. Just be safe.
Yeah. And if you're gonna do psychedelics or dive into that aspect of it, just do it in an environment where you're comfortable.
Do your research.
Do your research as well. Yeah.
So I think that's it for us today. We got a lot of content today.
The longest podcast
yet.
Longest podcast yet. We got some cool people coming up still. We hope to keep on trucking.
Yep. And big thanks to Thad, and may peace and happiness be with you all.
Yes, blessings from the Most High.